Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. Today we're doing the mid-year freakout tag, and it just happens to be July 4th, which I'm off work, and it seemed like a really good moment to reflect on my reading so far this year. I think everybody kind of does this tag around this time of year, and I find it to be a really fun way to think about what I've read so far and what I still need to read. So that's what we're going to be doing today, but first I have to mention one new little change in my life is that my partner and I have just gotten a dog. So as we're taking a moment to reflect on the way that the year has gone so far, I do want to mention that because that is a big change in my year. She is not around. I was actually going to film her for this, but I'm not sure where she is at the moment. I think she's gone back downstairs because she's mad that my partner is in his office with the door shut, but I'll put a picture of her in here. Her name is Maisie, and she is a really sweet girl. We've had her just about a week now. We got her last Saturday. It's currently Friday, and she's really doing well. She's had a few rough days at the start. She was very anxious. She's also a mama dog, so she has had puppies in the last couple of months. The puppies were weaned and were ready for adoption, so that was when we got a chance to adopt her, and she's had a little bit of a rough time, but the last couple of days we've really seen her start to open up. Her personality is coming out. She's very sassy, but also very gentle, and she's just a sweet girl. So I wanted to put a picture of her up here since I can't find her to film at the moment, but I'll try to remember to include clips of her in future videos. But yeah, Maisie is the newest member of our household, and since we're taking this moment as a chance to reflect, I just needed to put that out there because I just think she's awesome and everyone should have to see her. So yeah, that's the new dog part, and now we're just going to dive straight into the questions from this tag, and I'll also have the original creators tagged in the description down below. But the first question for this tag is, what's the best book you've read so far this year? And for me, this is The Lies of the Django by Moses Osei-Otomi. Also, I'm putting a picture up here. I don't own this book, but I'm just doing pictures. I've decided to make editing Hope's life hard in the future because we're just going to do pictures because I'm reusing some of the books for some of the questions. But anyway, Lies of the Django by Moses Osei-Otomi, which is the start of a fantasy novella trilogy that's following different people in the same world 500 years apart in each installment. I haven't read the later two books yet, but I loved the first one so much. I'm really excited to pick them up. This one's following a young boy named Tutu who is living in this place called the City of Lies that has no water, and he ends up going on a exploration mission out in the Forever Desert to try and find water for his city. And through that journey, he ends up learning a lot about the world, learning about why the world works the way it does, why the City of Lies has no water. And ultimately, the story is really about stories and propaganda and how we can resist the oppression that is exercised on us through particularly the telling of stories and specific kinds of stories. So I thought this was a really fascinating exploration of that idea, and I really enjoyed following Tutu. He's a young boy going from 12 to 13. It's kind of set around his birthday initially, and so as he's growing older, he's learning so much more about the world, and he goes on this really interesting physical journey, but also kind of mental, emotional journey as he is learning about the world. And I thought this was a brilliant exploration of its themes. The writing is incredible. The characters are really beautifully written, and I felt so much for all of them. So I definitely will be reading the later installments in the series because this was just incredible. Second question is, what's the best sequel you've read so far this year? And I think my best sequel is A Restless Truth by Freya Marske. This is the second book in the Last Binding trilogy, which is a series of queer romance stories that all have a fantasy twist. They're all set in kind of Edwardian America/England, primarily England, and they all are following characters who are magicians. And the second installment is following the sister of one of our main characters from the first book as she is traveling across the ocean from America back to England with somebody that she's supposed to be escorting, but then that woman that she's escorting dies. So Maud has to go on this adventure to try and solve a murder mystery on a ship. It's incredible. I love a close circle murder mystery. I love a mystery on a ship. I love Maud. She's just this bubbly, bright person, and the way that she treats others is just really with kindness and empathy, and I like the way that she interacts with people, but also the way that she kind of refuses to take shit from people too. She's just a really fun character to follow. And then she gets a love interest, Violet, who I also think is interesting. I think their relationship is really fascinating, the way it develops over this short period of time, and the way it leaves off in a very different place than Robin and Edwin in the first book. We also get some new friendships here with characters that, one character, Lord Hawthorne, who I hated in the first book, I actually really like him in the second book, so I'm really interested to see how he progresses through the rest of the series. This was just a really, really fun installment. The mystery is fun, the romance is fun, and has a lot of depth to it, I think. Has a lot of, heart to it, and it's just a good time. I just had a great time reading this book, so definitely the best sequel I've read so far. Question number 3, what's a new release you haven't read yet but want to? And I have 2 to mention because these were 2 of my top anticipated releases for the year, which were The Tomb of Dragons by Catherine Addison and The Devils by Joe Abercrombie. So The Tomb of Dragons is the conclusion to the Cemeteries of Amalo series, which is a spin-off from my favorite book ever, The Goblin Emperor, and it's following one of my favorite characters, Thara Kelleher, as he is solving mysteries and dealing with personal emotional troubles, and it's just a really fascinating series. I love Kelleher as a detective character. And The Tomb of Dragons, I've heard, leaves off in an interesting place. My best friend read this, and I think she wasn't totally satisfied with the way the series ends, but she did want to know what I thought of it, so I really need to get to that one. And then The Devils by Joe Abercrombie is his newest book, which is not actually set in the universe that all of his other books have been set in. So, at least all of his other adult books, I think. I think he also has a middle grade series that's not set there. But it's his first adult book that's not set in the First Law universe, and I really want to give it a try because I've been hearing great things about the action and about the humor, which are some things I really liked in the first of the First Law books. I've only read the first one so far, The Blade itself, but I'm in the midst of that series I'm trying to pick up before they're hanged soon, and just loved his writing, and I feel like that was his debut, so it's got to be much higher quality by the time we get to The Devils, so I'm really excited to give that one a try and see how it compares, how my reading experience of it compares to my experience with The Blade itself. Question number 4 is most anticipated release for the second half of the year. And I have several of these. I think I have kind of 4 that are the ones I'm most looking forward to. The first is The Bewitching by Sylvia Miranda Garcia, which actually comes out later this month, I think on the 15th. I have an arc of this one. I'm hoping to pick it up in the next day or so. But this one is a multi-generational horror story about a group of, or not a group of women, but these different women across time who have some sort of encounter with a witch. And one of them, I think, sounds like kind of the central character, is a grad student in the 90s. Then we also have Lucky Day by Chuck Tingle, which I just read Bury Your Gaze a few months ago and absolutely loved it, so I've been highly anticipating this next book from him. Also Catabasis by R.F. Kuang, which I feel like has been everywhere. I think everyone's kind of anticipating this one, about a couple of grad students who travel to hell to rescue their mentor. And then finally I want to mention The Killer Question by Janice Hallett, which is her newest mixed media murder mystery, and I'm so excited for this one. I also have an arc for it. It comes out in September. I think Lucky Day and Catabasis both come out in August. Question number 5, we start to take a bit of a negative turn in the questioning. We have, what's your biggest disappointment? And I have 2 answers for this that were both books that I feel like I should have really enjoyed, but I ended up really not having a good time with. This first one was The Midnight Pack by Jasmine Kuliasha, I think is the author's name. This one, I saw the original blurb for it. It sounded like it was going to be a really classic kind of paranormal mystery with a dash of romance, and it ends up being much more romance focused, which isn't a bad thing. I did mention I loved A Restless Truth. I can really enjoy a fantasy romance, but I really didn't like the love interest in this book. I initially did, but we get a chapter from his POV that made me hate him, and I didn't like the way that the romance just kind of dominated the plot for a while, where we have this really interesting murder mystery that gets set up, and it feels like for a while we just forget that that's a thing happening, so that our main character, Jericho James, can walk into various locations with a love interest, almost kiss him, then not kiss him for various reasons, and then walk into a different location to do it all again. It just felt like it dragged really bad, and the romance ultimately dominated the last half of the book as well. It also has weird pacing issues where the thing that happens at the midpoint of the book feels like it should be the final climactic thing, and then it just goes completely off the rails from there. So it had some pacing issues, had some structure issues. I didn't care for the romance in it. All of that aside, I did really like the main character, so I would be willing to try the second book in the series, which I know already has a title. I can't remember what it is. It's something about Bigfoot, but I am intrigued enough. I'd like to try another book from the series, but at the same time, this one was just a real big letdown because it seemed like on paper it should have been a book I loved. My other big disappointment was First Become Ashes by K.M. Spera. This one was a disappointment partially because I really enjoyed, I don't know if enjoyed is the right word, but I read Docile, his first book, and thought it was a really engaging read. I thought it was doing some interesting things, talking about some big ideas, which also I agreed with a lot of the criticisms about it, but I personally thought it was an interesting reading experience. This second book, I think, starts off there. We're following some people in a cult who are dealing with the dissolution of the cult after the leader has been arrested by the FBI. And I think it starts off on this really interesting emotional tone of these people who have very different relationships to the cult they were in, having to deal with the emotional fallout of the dissolution of the events that led to the dissolution of the cult. And then we get this new character added in a little before the halfway point, who I found really unpleasant, who has this sort of romance situation with one of our main characters, who is, by the way, already in a committed relationship. And I just felt like all of his interactions with this character who'd been in the cult, we have Calvin, who's a cosplayer, and then we have Lark, who's from the cult. And I just felt like all of Calvin's interactions with Lark were kind of icky given Lark's background and his previous experiences. And I felt like the book never really gave Calvin consequences for the way he treated Lark, and I found that very frustrating. So this was a big letdown for me because I was fully ready to give it 5 stars for like the first 40-ish%. So those were the ones that I've been most disappointed by, but great news, the next question is what are your biggest surprises? And I do actually have a couple to mention. The first one I want to mention is Misery by Stephen King. This was recommended to me by a coworker because I had been reading It a couple of years ago and left off with that feeling like this was fine. I'd be willing to give Stephen King another try, but I just don't know where I would go next. So I asked one of my coworkers who's a big Stephen King fan, like, what should I read next? And that was one of his 3 recommendations. And I think that he nailed it with that one. I had a much better time with Misery. I think it's a really interesting story following a writer who is captured by his biggest fan and following the kind of months of horror that he experiences while being trapped in her house after a car accident. And I really enjoyed the tension of it and some of the ways that things were described. I think that Stephen King is really good at coming up with really evocative descriptions of things. There's one image that shows up right at the start of the book that describes the main character's pain as being like this metal pylon in the ocean that is sometimes covered by the high tide and sometimes is not, and that high tide is like the medication he's being given. So it's this image of his pain is like it's something that's ever present, it's something that never goes away, but it's just more or less noticeable depending on how much of this medication he's been given. So I really liked that description. That was something that came up a lot. And there were just lots of really great moments like that. I ultimately didn't care for the main character all that much. I found him a little hard to root for because he's a little bit annoying. And I didn't love the way that the book dealt with its villain and some discussions around mental health with her. It was trying to diagnose her with something that I felt like was, kind of villainizing mental health, and didn't love that. But ultimately I did have a lot better time with this one than I did with It. So still was like a step up for me and made me go, okay, maybe I would be interested in reading more from Stephen King, because I see why people say he's a great storyteller. It's not always a total hit for me each time, but I see where people are coming from with that opinion. The other big surprise I had was Small Game by Blair Braverman. This was a book that I picked up for my work's book club, and I would never have picked this up on my own. It ended up being a survival story. I think it was billed as a thriller, but it's very much like a survival story about this group of people who are on a survival TV show, reality TV show, and then something goes wrong, and they are trapped in the woods, and it's, a bad situation. I really liked the way that this was examining how these characters reacted to that situation and the different reasons that they had come out to be a part of this TV show in the first place. I thought that it was very much about those relationships and about the importance of human connection for survival. So I really enjoyed it. I was way more than I would have thought I would. It's been a very long time since I've read anything that's strictly a survival story, but it was really engaging. I really liked that none of our characters felt like totally good people. They're all kind of up to something at various points, and they're all kind of annoying in their own unique ways, but the ways that they banded together were just really heartwarming in some ways. The ways that they treated each other in this time of really significant need were great, and I think it has an interesting-ish ambiguous ending. It's a little bit of a too neat with a bow kind of a situation for me, so it wasn't a full 5 stars, but I definitely enjoyed this way more than I thought I was going to. Question number 7 is, who is your new favorite author, either a debut author or someone who's new to you? And I have to say Robin Wall Kimmerer for this one. I had never read her before. I've heard a lot about Braiding Sweetgrass, but I picked up The Serviceberry, which is just a very short nonfiction from her, and it was just a really interesting idea. She talks about the serviceberry as a model of a more environmentally and community-friendly economics, which was just fascinating. I think her arguments are really interesting, and I really appreciate her writing because she writes these really beautiful descriptions. I think everything is very lush, but it's also this very, what I would call, welcoming writing. It's very accessible, and she's really good at explaining difficult concepts in an easy to grasp way. Just really great writer, and I'm interested in reading more from her. Question number 8 is newest fictional crush, and I don't have an answer for this one, so we're going to skip it. Next up is newest favorite character for question 9, and this one, I mentioned him already, Lord Hawthorne from Restless Truth. I just think he's a fascinating character. He's really an asshole in the first book in the series, but in the second book you start to learn a lot more about him. You see him form these kind of complex friendships with both Maud and Violet and another character who I'm not going to name because that would be bit of a spoiler for second book, but he starts to form these kind of complex friendships, and we learn a lot more about him and about why he is the way he is, why he is so prickly with other people, and I thought it just made him like a much more empathetic character. You kind of understand why he behaves so horribly to the people around him, and I'm really interested to learn more about him in book 3 because that is actually his romance. He is one of the 2 main characters of book 3, so I'm really impressed with how Freya Marske managed to completely like flip my opinion of that character. He just goes from being like my least favorite character in book 1 to one of my favorite characters in book 2. So it was really interesting. Next up we have a book that made you cry, and I have to mention Little Rot by Akwaeke Emezi. There was no like full-on sobbing, but there were these moments where we had these really beautiful, bittersweet interactions between these characters that had these very messy friendship dynamics, and I found myself tearing up a lot reading this one. I think it's just really emotional and really poignant in some of those friendships, and so that one definitely like made me tear up a little bit. Then we also have a book that made you happy, and I'm choosing The Orb of Kyrada by Catherine Addison, not because I would say this is a particularly happy book. I think a lot of things that happen in it are quite sad, and in some ways it's about the main character grappling with the grief that he feels over the loss of his best friend, but it also is just this like fun kind of hijinks ensue adventure through a world that I really like. I really liked our main character and his sense of like right and wrong being really strong throughout the story, and I just enjoyed seeing this kind of different aspect of the world that Catherine Addison has created, and so I had a lot of fun with that, and that was part of what made me happy about it. Our penultimate question: what was the most beautiful book you've bought so far this year or received? And for this one I am going to quickly grab them off the shelves because I think it's going to be easier to show you than putting a picture up on the screen. It's gonna be more impactful, so I'll be right back. Okay, back. The first of the most beautiful books I've bought or received, I bought at a local indie bookstore, and I bought it because they had a really great description sitting on the table with it. This is When the Angels Left the Old Country by Sasha Lamb. This is a Jewish fantasy that it says it's, according to the little card that was next to it that made me buy it, what Good Omens wishes it was. Which just sounds incredible to me. That sounds so fun. So I'm really excited to give this one a try. We're following an angel and a demon, and they are traveling to America, I believe, for the first time. So really interested to see how that story goes. But I just loved the artwork on this cover. I think it's beautiful. I like the color choices and the font choices. It's just a really beautifully rendered cover, and you kind of see the little wrap of the light around the back. So I really like this one. I think it's a really beautiful piece of art. Trying to figure out where I can put this now. We'll put it here. There. All right, now it's on display. Second one that I have to mention, the third one just hit me in the ankle. Awesome. Second one I have to mention is The Devils by Joe Abercrombie, which I know I've already mentioned it, but very plain cover. But this was, I don't even know if they're all like this. This is the Barnes Noble edition. But if you take off the dust jacket, there is some really cool foiling underneath the cover, and then there's also these cool end pages that have these sort of medieval manuscript style illustrations of some of the characters in the story. So I really like that element of it, and then we also have a little bit of foiling on the spine as well. But I thought that was really cool. I was not expecting that. And there's also a few pieces of art in the middle, although of course now that I'm saying that I can't seem to flip to any, but there are some illustrations in the middle of the book as well. So the last of these beautiful books I want to mention is Sword Heart by T. Kingfisher, another one that just has some beautiful cover art. I really like this style of illustration, and it's got the beautiful sprayed edges. And does this one have anything under the cover? It does. It has a sword on the cover, foiled, a little bit of foiling on the spine, and then it has some like fun end pages. So I just really like the patterning, and again, I love the illustration on this cover. I think it's really interesting. Diving in with our final question, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? A whole bunch. I would say about half. I think it's 7 of my 12, or possibly 6 of my 12 self-destructing books for the year. I made a whole list. I have several of those left to read. I also have some series I want to finish. So the rest of this, like, what do you need to get to list is just series finishers, because I have a few series that I'm really enjoying that I'm like 1 or 2 books from the end. So A Power Unbound by Freya Marske, I need to finish off the last Binding trilogy. I also want to go ahead and read Before They're Hanged and The Last Argument of Kings by Joe Abercrombie and get through that first chunk of the First Law universe, because I would like to continue on and read the rest of the books in that universe. Then again, The Tomb of Dragons, I mentioned earlier, being the end of the Cemeteries of Imalo series. And finally, His Mortal Demise by Vanessa Lee, which is the end of a YA fantasy duology. Read the first book of that last year, which was The Last Bloodcarver, and I just thought it was a really interesting magic system. I really appreciate the way that Vanessa Lee like committed to her big emotional moments and the kind of angst and awfulness of things that happen to the characters. I really like the way that she committed to going through those really dark moments of the story, and I'm interested to see how things are going to progress given the cliffhanger that we get at the end of the previous book. But yeah, that is pretty much it. That's the whole tag. That's my thoughts this far in the year. I've definitely had some ups and downs with my reading this year. I feel like I've been slumping a lot more than usual. Part of it, I think, is that I started streaming, so I've been doing a little bit more of that, and so dedicating more of my time to that. That's just kind of naturally slowed my reading pace. But I've also just been not so much in the mood to pick up a book. Been doing a lot more crafting, a lot more video gaming in general, even outside of streaming. And yeah, just kind of natural fluctuations in my reading have been more on the low side this year. But going into the latter half of the year, I do have some big goals I'd like to finish, so I'm hopeful that things will pick up a little bit. I am very excited going into the rest of July because I have some big reading plans for this month, but we'll see how all of that goes. But yeah, let me know down in the comments below what your answers to some of these questions were. I really hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, I hope you'll consider giving it a like, maybe even subscribing to see what comes next. I'm currently posting on Tuesdays and Saturdays, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.